There is nothing more iconic than the mech that appears on the Battle Droids box. And this is the Warhammer. Or whenever I'm in a game where I'm piloting the Warhammer, I will say the Great Hammer of War. There are many, many versions, so I will touch up on the ones that I have sheets for or the ones that I have in books. Fortunately, that's still a lot of versions, but I will still have to be a bit short on some of the descriptions. Now, because it's one of the original mechs of Battletech, you get these Nova Combat books for it. This is one where you give your book to the other player and they give you yours, and you can see here that the version that's in the book kind of looks like the Battle Droids. And basically there's a mech sheet and you mark off damage and heat as you go, and there's no dice rolling. It also has a list of rules that are listed here, which I will kind of talk through later. Actually, I may have to reserve the talking through the rules for a future video, otherwise it's going to be a little bit too long, but it definitely is worth a video. There's also rules for multiple on-one engagements and campaigns and experience too. Many of these are missing their pilot cards, but you can actually find JPEGs of what they are supposed to look like scanned somewhere online, and you can print them out on cardstock with your own printer at home. So let's look up the original Warhammer. This is the first TRO. Let's flip through. Well, close to here. Should be close. Somewhere near here. There it is. The WHM-6R. It's basically PPCs, medium lasers, small lasers, machine guns, and an SRM-6. You'll mostly use the PPCs at range, and then the medium lasers against mechs, the SRMs I like to use against vehicles, and the machine guns are obviously anti-infantry. A notable pilot was Natasha Kerensky. Also, if you're into the miniatures, the legs of the Warhammer, the longbow, and the rifleman, I believe, are the same legs. And it's just, they're different at the hip and up. But that's just for the original, oldest models. You have to be careful about overheating though, and in the Warrior series, a Warhammer actually overheats because it uses its weapons too much against an archer that doesn't even have to fire back. So let's check it out. This is the 3050, when the clans were invented. First there's the clan section. I'm gonna skip through that, but we can kind of look at some of the stuff, some of the goodies. This is what you have been going up against in 3050. These are the helm memory core upgrades to the 3025 mechs, plus a couple extra new designs. And some old Starlead mechs that were resuscitated with the helm memory core, like the Crab. And here, getting close to the Archer. It should be next to the Archer or near it. Because it's similar in tonnage. Ah, here it is. I guess it was a little bit off. So this one is the 7M, which is the Merrick upgrade. And its main feature is that it's got ER PPCs and an AMS system. Lore-wise, the WHM-6R continued in production in the Tarian Concordat long after the modernized versions came out. And here's the modernized post-helm memory core 7M version again. So let's start going through the variants before I go through the overall battle performance at the end. First, let's look at the standard 3025 Warhammer. It's 2 PPCs, medium lasers, small lasers, machine guns, and an SRM6 in the torso to round it all out. You'll note that it has 4 heat sinks in the legs, which are good because you can find a pool of water and stand in it and start popping off your PPCs without fear of overheating. This version is known as the Hot Hammer because of its flamers. Leave it to Liao to burn down all the people. Just burn them all down. They are rebelling? Well, teach them a lesson. And here's a Liao colored Warhammer in a modern artistic rendering. The Kurita version just gets rid of the machine guns in favor of more heat sinks, but otherwise it's very similar to the 6R. I always imagined that the Hot Hammer would be red rather than green, but hey, that's just the way it is. The Davian version gets rid of all the ammo, just goes pure energy, just because they're thinking ahead for supply problems. This one's a future tech Steiner with streak ERPPC and pulse lasers. This one is a clan refit. Its main change is the fact that it's got pulse lasers instead of PPCs as its primary long-range weapons. Otherwise, it's just the original chassis with clan weapons. Because it doesn't have much of an upgrade for its heat sinks, or even any, I'm kind of suspicious that this one might not actually do that well. And this one is the true clan refit with an entirely new chassis that just kind of is loosely based on the original, and it's got the original, sort of closer to the original loadout otherwise, except all clan reversions. And now note that its heat sinks are all doubles, so it's effectively got 40 heat sinkage, which means it's going to totally kick ass. So first we're going to do a deep dive on the standard 3025 Warhammer, then we'll take a look at the sim results of the variants. Okay, Inner Sphere 3025 Warhammer. You can see its damage profile. It likes to be up close, and it tends to use a lot of different weapons, but it does a lot of damage up close. Its offensive and defensive battle value are fairly evenly spread, and my computerized calculation is just slightly high, but not too much, almost right on the dot versus the official 1299. This means it is not a dedicated DPS unit, but its armor distribution doesn't quite match a pure Brawler either. So it has 18 heat sinks and 10 tons of armor. 10 is a little bit on the light side. You can have up to 13.5 tons on this mech. And 18 heat sinks is okay, but you can actually overheat with that. This is a heavy mech, but it does seem to tend to play more like an assault mech. But you have to remember that it's not actually an assault mech. It is only a heavy mech. Its armor distribution looks closer to a DPS unit than a Brawler. I actually had to tweak my automatic armor allocation algorithm to make it match the Warhammer better, and as a result I ended up improving both the DPS and Brawler algorithms for automatic armor distribution. So to figure out how to distribute armor on your mech, assuming it's a DPS unit, Brawler used the other numbers instead. You start by allocating your head armor, subtract that from your total, and then continue with your remaining armor for the next stages. First, take your total number of points of armor based on how many tons you have of armor, and divide by your CT divide number, which is 10 for DPS. For 160 points total for this Warhammer, that you would get 16. So that's the initial center torso allocation before extra armor is reallocated. Then take your next constant, which is your initial rear CT fraction, which is 0.5, and multiply that 16 by 0.5. That gets you 8. That's how much you put on your rear center torso. Now you go to your third constant, which is your initial side T versus CT fraction. That's 0.75. So your initial CT is 16 times 0.75 is 12. So your initial right and left torso armors are 12. You'll notice that it's actually 18 here, but that's because you haven't done the reallocation of excess armor yet. Now you take your left and right torso, front torso armor, and multiply by that same initial rear CT fraction, which is 0.5. So 12 times 0.5 is 6. And if you look at your rear left and right torso armor, it is 6. Now you want to go to your next constant, which is your arm divide. That is 5 for a DPS unit. So take all your remaining armor points divided by 5 and allocate that to your arms. Then take your remaining points and do your leg divide, which is 3, and allocate that between your two legs. Now you are ready to go back for a second pass with your excess armor, which you should have some. The order of allocation of excess armor is: you first divide all your remaining armor points that are not yet allocated by 3 and put that into the left, and then the other equal amount to the right front torso. Then you put as many points as you can into your center front torso, and you may or may not have any points left over. If you have any remaining points left over, those get spread evenly in the arms, and finally then the last bits, if any, will go to the legs. This makes your mech a more DPS oriented armor distribution because you put a little bit more into your arms than your legs, just like you do on many DPS mechs, whereas with the Brawler you might have more in your legs than your arms. I also tweaked the Brawler algorithm a little bit. It still reconstructs the awesome correctly, but it works on more lighter mechs as well, a little better. So for a Brawler armor distribution, the initial CT divide is now 9, and the other constants are as were shown in this video up here in this the Brawler section. And for the Warhammer's armor, you would get those numbers as shown. The main changes to the Brawler distribution is the initial CT divide is bigger, the rear CT fraction is 0.6, and the arm divide is 6, the leg divide is 3. And this distributes the armor in a different order, but comes up with roughly the same pattern again for the awesome. Then the rest of the Warhammer, the standard 3025 Warhammer, of course 2 PPCs, and then each torso has medium laser, small laser, and a machine gun, and then it's got a leftover SRM6 just over its right shoulder. So against multiple opponents, the standard Warhammer holds up pretty well. It only lost a little more than half its battles, but it did tend to tie more than win against multiple targets. And then against heavy and assault mechs, here I'm calling large mechs, but large mechs are assault mechs in my system here. So against heavy and assault mechs, it did reasonably well. You can see that it kind of wins and loses about equally and ties some. Against small and mid-sized mechs, it's mostly predictable in that it generally tends to win against small mechs. Maybe it loses when it gets backshot a couple times. Mid-sized mechs do a little better against it just because mid-sized mechs have enough firepower that when they flank the Warhammer because they've got a lot more move, they may actually kill the Warhammer. So the Warhammer does very well against large and assault mechs, but might have a little bit of a weakness against getting flanked by medium mechs. And that is why you provide a Warhammer, a bodyguard mech, something that's has enough punch and maneuverability to protect the Warhammer from getting flanked, so you don't get hit in the back. Against vehicles, it's mostly predictable. It's never loses to small vehicles. A few unlucky situations with larger vehicles and mid-sized vehicles, and it can tie sometimes too, especially since I have programmed the mechs and vehicles to flee if they run out of ammo or they become too damaged or they've lost all their weapons, so that turns into a tie. Now for the final comparison with the different variants and their win fractions. Because the 2C is a full clan redesign, I won't consider that, but the 7M and the 7S have a 65% win rate, which is significantly higher than the others, but that's because they are higher tech. Even when correcting for battle value, the 7M and the 7S still dominate. That's probably because of all the double heat sinks or something. But if you're not allowed to do anything other than 30-25, 6K has a 0.41 wins per kilo battle value, which is higher than the other 30-25 designs. Then looking at the wins per ton, no surprise, the higher tech ones win the most per ton. And you'll notice that the 6RC, which is actually just a 6C if you want to consider it that naming scheme, kind of sucks. And that's because it's stuck with the old 18 heat sinks that are single, and then it's just putting clan weapons on it. So it's like higher heat output but small heat sinks, so it chokes. Then looking at the performance per C bill, the 7S and the 7M still do well in spite of being higher tech because they're not doing foolish things like XL engines. And of the lower tech variants, the D version, that is the Davian version, has the highest performance per C bill. Leave it to them to know how to maintain without ammo to make their operating costs cheap. And that's the final wrap up for the Warhammer. Now this picture here is of the Destroid version that came from an anime show. As far as I know, there aren't really any Warhammer variants that pack huge amounts of LRMs in their torsos, but you can get this in 1/72 scales for a battle troops or a clan troops game, because you can just get them from Bandai Namco or whoever makes the models now.